When Street Fighter II hit arcades worldwide in 1991, it's no exaggeration to say that it was a landmark moment in video game history. Street Fighter II wasn't just a great fighting game, it cemented fighting games as a legitimate genre and set the path for countless games in the future that would use it as a basis. Even today, nearly 30 years after its release, there's well-renowned games that would never have existed if it wasn't for Street Fighter II. But right now we're not talking about the fighting games of today. No. Instead, we'll be going over one of the many fighting games that were spawned when Street Fighter Fever was just hitting full effect. If you've seen my World Heroes review, then you'll know I've already gone over many of the Street Fighter clones and would-be successors of the early 90s. But there's one series in particular that I'd really like to go into depth with. I know you guys read the title already, so here they are. Well, there's no better place to start than the first game in the series, titled simply Clayfighter, for the Super Nintendo. After some company logos, the game starts with a very simple introduction, stating that they have but one goal in all the universe, to be king of the circus. While 8 disembodied heads float around a crown and a hot dog, obviously the object of their desires. We're not given much explanation beyond this, but we do get a pretty fun theme song that includes some really impressive voice samples and music. I do have to admit though, the song does kind of get stuck in your head after a while. Clayfighter, Clayfighter, come on fight them if you dare. Ooh, Clayfighter, Clayfighter, hit them, smack them, they don't care. After the theme, we're taken to a pretty bland menu screen with really basic text, but I guess it gets the job done. Heading into arcade mode, however, the character selection screen is a lot better, with a big googly-eyed clown front and center, a full body animation of what your selected character will look like, and even a short bio for each of them. So short, in fact, that they're all one-word categories and responses. Imagine if dating websites were like this. Let's see, she likes food. Food's good. Food's good. Hates salad. Oh, that's not, I like salad. I kind of like salad. That's... Wants cookies? Really? Cookies? I mean, there's more to life than just cookies. Oh, and she's in a band. Yeah, that sounds like a stable career. Oh yeah, totally. Pass. So anyway, you pick your character, you go inside of the giant clown face, and you're taken off to the overworld map. Or like 1/3 of an overworld map. I actually like when games do stuff like this. It really helps you feel this sense of progression that makes you want to see what comes next. When you finally get to play, you'll realize very quickly that the game plays almost identically to Street Fighter II. Well, in theory. You've got your 6 attack buttons, which include light, medium, and heavy punches and kicks. You have your grabs, and you have your special moves, many of which involve projectiles. The only real difference here is that the game plays much sloppier. Certain attacks overtake others without much rhyme or reason, characters move sluggishly, and many special moves just seem redundant compared to the others that are already at your disposal. The game also generally just feels like you're fighting on the moon with how slow the action is. Now to be fair, the first home console iteration of Street Fighter II was quite slow as well, but this was fixed in the far superior Turbo Edition. Clayfighter actually allows you to increase the speed in the options menu, but this doesn't just speed up the gameplay. Somehow the entire game itself seems to be sped up, to the point where everyone just looks like they're on crack. It may look weird and it may not be preferred, but it at least makes the game more playable. Now let's go through all the characters. Firstly, we have Bad Mr. Frosty. Featured on the front cover of the game, Frosty is sort of what you'd call the mascot of the entire Clayfighter series. An obvious contrast and parody of the friendly Frosty the Snowman children's character, Bad Mr. Frosty is a big grouchy snowman who would like nothing more than to see that it becomes winter all year round. Taffy is exactly as his name describes, a vaguely human-shaped pile of living taffy which seems to have a penchant for sweets. His main feature, besides being sentient candy, is his ability to stretch and contort his body in ways that would make Jim Carrey blush. Next is Tiny, who's probably the character that seems the least out of place in a fighting game. There isn't too much to say about this guy that you can't get out of just looking at him. He's a dim-witted bodybuilder who hates wimps. Then there's the Blob, who is probably the character that seems the most in place with the game called Clayfighter. He's a mischievous ball of clay who morphs into whatever shapes he thinks will help him win his fights. If I didn't think that Bad Mr. Frosty was the de facto mascot of the series, then Blob would probably be the next choice. For obvious reasons. Next, no, that's not Honky Tonk Man, it's the completely original character Blue Suede Goo. This overweight, washed-up musician joins the fray using his singing and ridiculous haircut to fight his opponents. He's also definitely not based on anyone that actually existed. Next up is Ichabod Clay, whose name is an arguably clever pun off the Sleepy Hollow's Ichabod Crane. He's basically just a spooky pumpkin head with a stereotypical bedsheet ghost body. Then we have Helga, who seems to be an amalgamation of a Viking and an opera singer, and is surprisingly agile for her size. She's large. And finally we have Bonker, your token creepy clown who gives the other creepy clowns a run for their money by the fact that he looks like he hits the gym pretty regularly. He must not be too bad though for the fact that he hates crying. But then again, the Joker was known to kill his victims with laughter. The highlight and gimmick of this game is of course the fact that all the fighters are made out of clay. This allows them to be beaten and injured in many different ways that would look overly violent in most other fighting games, but here it just makes things comedic with how over the top everything is. This fact is even referenced in the theme song. The order of enemies you face is always the same in one-player mode, which actually does make it feel like you're trying to complete some specific challenge. One thing that bugs me, however, is the fact that all of the enemies use their alternate colors instead of their regular ones, even if you're playing as a completely different character. It's not really a big deal, but just look at when you're fighting Taffy. His level background is a different color than he is. Why? Why? A more significant complaint I can give is that the computers you face off against are supremely overpowered. And not just because they're high difficulty either. From the very first fight to the last, every computer's special moves just seem to do double the damage of your own, which is just plain unfair. On top of that, they have the uncanny ability to break out of your grabs the instant you catch them. And then they even punish you as they break out, making you take more damage than they did. And their own grabs are even worse, just dealing ridiculous damage before you're able to break out. I mean, just look at this. Jeez. The only real strategy here is to be cheap and use your special moves to your advantage, while trying to avoid getting hit with theirs. Along the way, you fight a few of the same characters more than once, but they're at least given a new sprite art for their levels on the map. Eventually you make it to the crater-looking level that says 100% on it before facing off against the game's end boss, who happens to be named End Boss. I'm sure this is also a reference to the infamous Street Fighter boss M. Bison. Although fighting a giant pearl necklace may seem scary, End Boss doesn't really have much going for him. He really just bounces around the stage and occasionally throws a random projectile stolen from one of the other characters. He's undoubtedly the easiest fight in the game, which is a bit disappointing for a final boss fight. Also, judging by his lack of a moveset, simple design, and the fact that the announcer doesn't even say his name, it's likely that the programmers just threw him into the game at the last minute to give the players some kind of final match, which I guess is better than nothing. Now, I could go into more detail about all the little flaws that this game has as a fighting game. The round timer being a long fuse of a bomb instead of just numbers is a cool idea, but since it's at the bottom of the screen and the fuse isn't as telling as specific numbers, it can be a lot harder to tell when the round is about to end. Both characters' health bars drain to the left. Preferably, you'd want health bars to drain more towards the middle of the screen where the timer usually is, so you can quickly glance to see how close both characters are to losing. When they both drain to one direction, you have to scan your eyes back and forth while also paying attention to the fight. And then there's the move balancing issues as well, like with Blob's razor move. It's really overpowered, since if you try to block it, it just keeps hitting you over and over again for chip damage, often leaving you even more damage than if you had just taken the attack head on. Okay, I said I wouldn't go into so much detail, because let's be honest, Clayfighter isn't that well made of a fighting game. But despite that, it's still a cool video game. The characters are all fun and unique in their own ways, the game has a good sense of humor, and the work they put into all the visual aspects of the game is clear. The name Clayfighter isn't just for show. They made actual clay models of every single character, meaning they had to hand sculpt and take pictures of every single movement and attack before transferring it into the game. It's something that you've really got to respect. Oh, and did I mention they made an updated version? That's right, much like Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Clayfighter had its own Turbo version. Oh yeah, Clayfighter Tournament Edition. And despite the name, they actually added more features than simply just a new mode to play. The game now features a brand new opening, which gives more backstory to the Clayfighter crew. It turns out they were all relatively ordinary members of a circus until a giant radioactive clay asteroid hit it, mutating them all into wacky clay creatures, all fighting to take control of the circus. Even the menu is given a nice makeover, which is a big improvement over the boring generic text used in the original. The game's natural speed has also been increased, making it possible to have the quicker gameplay without having to have all the characters snort cocaine first. The announcer has more lines than before, usually commenting on if a match was particularly neck and neck or just completely one-sided.
Mr. Frosty wins by a perfect!
There's also upgraded and new levels added as well for many of the characters. Oh, and they even managed to fix Blob's broken razor blade move. Then there's of course the titular tournament mode, which is about the same as the tournament mode in any other game. I do like that they let you see these unique up-close portraits of each character though. It really lets you see the detail in each clay model. The only thing that particularly disappointed me was that they didn't add character endings. When it comes to beating the arcade mode of just about any fighting game, it's pretty much expected that you're going to get some kind of ending for your character, even if it's just a single image and some text. But even Tournament Edition doesn't include this, which is a real shame, as that takes away a huge motive to beat the game multiple times. Okay guys, last minute update. As it turns out, there are character endings to Clayfighter. You just have to beat the game on the hardest difficulty to get them. But the game never tells you this, so I hadn't known this fact for years. You get an entertaining scene of the winner beating the other Clay combatants, and an epilogue. Helga's story even makes reference to Olaf the Stout, a lost Viking from one of Interplay's other great series. Sorry for the late recognition, Clayfighter. The only other thing I really have to mention here is the fact that you can't seem to be able to skip the points counter at the end of each fight, which you actually were able to do in the original version. Pressing all the buttons on the controller does nothing, and because of this, it actually took me longer to record the arcade mode gameplay of Tournament Edition than the original one. It's probably a minor gripe, but not one to go unnoticed. Okay, I think that about covers everything to do with Clayfighter 1. Let's see what's next.
Sorry.